Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Building Science Digest. I'm your host, Christian Kennedy, and today we have Dennis Wilson with us today. Dennis has been with Saint-Gobain for 18 years, and he is the leader of ESG and circular economy for Saint-Gobain North America. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you.
We are going to talk all about the circular economy, which I think at the surface might be unfamiliar to a lot of people. But for those that are, great, thank you for tuning in. For those that aren't, let's just high level tell us what that is, what that means.
Sure. So, circular economy, there's this organization called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're sort of the expert on what circular economy is, and they break it down into three areas. So it's reducing waste as much as possible. It's recirculating materials. So materials at the end of their life, when you might throw something away, get brought back as a raw material for another product. Okay. And then it's working toward regenerating nature. So by doing those things, by reusing materials, you're not having to dig up raw materials out of the ground, these sorts of things, and have all the impacts that go along with that. So that's generally what the circular economy is.
Okay, wonderful. So it sounds like there's a few parts or pieces within there. But before we even dive any deeper, I think, and you've been with the company for 18 years, how did Dennis Wilson get involved in this? Because it feels like something that may be relatively new out there. So walk with it, being here for 18 years, you've been a part of it for that entire time.
Yeah. I guess kind of starting on how I got involved in this at the beginning, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area. Everyone in my family either worked in a coal mine, drove a train to and from a coal mine to a power plant or a steel plant. And then all of a sudden those jobs weren't there anymore. So, I ended up coming out of that with a passion of how do I prevent that sort of economic impact from happening going forward. So I decided to get involved sort of in the sustainability space. So I've been involved in this space for most of my career. I came to Saint-Gobain specifically because of there's quite a bit of impact from an environmental perspective in the building space. And Saint-Gobain is really kind of focused on being the worldwide leader in light sustainable construction, reducing CO2 emissions and these sorts of things. So that's really why I came here and why I'm involved in this space.
Yeah, you mentioned that before we even started recording, just how much that our industry has an impact on the emissions and what we're doing to impact the environment. And you're working from within to basically course correct those actions.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And in that opportunity, you can also create a product that is very beneficial for your customers, right? So to me, there's no better place to be able to work on those sorts of things than here at Saint-Gobain.
And right here. Yeah, absolutely right. So to go back to the first question, and you were talking about the stages, really, not the stages necessarily, but talking about a circular economy. But most people probably are going to be familiar with, we were talking beforehand, linear economy and how that's what we see in our everyday lives, more or less, right? And the change and the differences between what is a linear economy compared to the circular economy and then these steps along the way.
Yeah, the linear economy is what we've been practicing really since the Industrial Revolution, right? So we optimize supply chains and everything that we do for things to end up in a landfill at the end of their life.
So interesting.
And only about 7% of the global economy is circular, meaning that we're bringing materials back and using them as raw materials for the next product. So really working toward a more circular economy helps us in a lot of different ways, being less impactful on the environment, but not having to do all of the things to be able to dig up raw materials out of the ground and do those things, not putting them in a landfill at the end of their life.
Absolutely.
And not wasting all the work that went into preparing those raw materials to go into something and create a product.
Right.
So to me, it's really just a better way of operating our economy.
Because a lot of the energy used is primarily focused on the mining of the raw materials and understanding that we can course correct, right? A term I've already used, but course correct that to ensure that the energy that we've spent mining those raw materials we're not doing that over and over again.
That's right.
Is that right? The main takeaway?
That's perfectly correct. So we have these things called different scopes of emissions, right? CO2 emissions. Right. So when you're talking about circular economy, generally you're talking about reducing scope 3 emissions.
Okay.
Scope 3 emissions are really all of the energy and the associated CO2 that goes into the materials that are going into our products.
The materials that are going into our products.
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So there was energy that went into digging that raw material out of the ground.
Right.
And there was CO2 that was associated with that energy as well. There was energy that went into converting that raw material into something that we can use in our processes, right? So the more we can use recycled materials, practice a circular economy, the more we can avoid the steps of having to dig raw materials up out of the ground, convert them into something else, and then bring them to our facilities. So that's scope 3 emissions. Right?
Okay, that's just scope.
Just scope 3
okay,
emissions.
Got it.
There's also what's called scope 1 and scope 2 emissions.
Okay.
So scope 1 emissions.
Dive in, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So scope 1 emissions are really the emissions that we emit whenever we're doing things like burning natural gas in order to be able to dry materials in our plants, to heat processes up, do things like melt sand to create insulation, dry rock in the case of gypsum products. Right. So it's the natural gas that we use on site at our facilities in order to be able to do those activities.
Okay.
Scope 2 emissions are really the emissions that are associated with the energy that we purchase. So when you buy electricity from a power provider that's providing power to your plant, whether they're using coal or they're using renewable energy, there's varying levels of CO2 that are associated with those things. So if you're able to reduce those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, you're able to overall reduce the embodied carbon that's within a material.
Okay.
We have a great example, one that I always give, in that again, going back to scope 3 emissions, in order to be able to reduce scope 3 emissions, we use recycled or circular materials.
Sure.
When we bring back glass into our insulation process, it takes less energy to be able to remelt recycled glass than it does to make glass out of raw materials. Virgin raw materials.
So it takes less energy. Right, I got it. Okay, so which is circular economy, right?
Yes.
At the very core of it. So scope 3 is impacted by scope 1 and 2 as well.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. So going into scope 3 are scope 1 and 2. Right.
Got it.
So when we sell a product to a customer, what they're getting is our scope 3. They're getting what they count as their scope 3 emissions.
Yes.
Are our scope 1, our scope 2, and our scope 3 emissions added together.
Oh, okay.
So when we create a product like insulation, we bring recycled glass back. We remelt that, which takes less energy to remelt recycled glass. So that reduces our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in the energy it takes to dry and melt and do all those sorts of things.
Sure.
Right. So that when we give that product to someone else, it has lower embodied carbon or lower scope 3 emissions as it's going out the door of our company.
Right. Okay. Understood. Right. And that's because we're using recycled glass rather than digging up the virgin raw materials.
That's right.
And spending less energy doing that.
Yeah. You're avoiding all those early steps, and then you're using a material that takes less energy to process.
Okay.
So all of those things.
Beautiful. So and that's the emission part of it. So we touched on linear and circular, and that falls into the phrasing that I've heard a few times is it's the cradle-to-cradle, cradle-to-grave, and the reuse. Explain those three for us, right? Because I think cradle-to-cradle, as we've talked about, that is circular economy. Correct me if I'm wrong. At the core.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Cradle-to-cradle is trying to get materials back to serve as a raw material for that next product.
Okay.
Cradle-to-grave is essentially the economy that we practice every day.
That's the linear part.
That's exactly okay. It's a linear economy where you're starting with a raw material, you're making it into something, the product gets used, and then at the end of its life, the design place where it was meant to go is unfortunately to a landfill.
The ground, yeah.
Right. So that's really the two ends of the spectrum as far as circular economy and linear economy go.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. So in order to essentially help our scope 3 emissions, not us as a manufacturing plant, but, and we talked about this earlier, there's a local level and then the large scale. And there are things that we can do as individuals, as smaller companies, and as large corporations to essentially limit all the scope 3 emissions and to help drive the circular economy forward. Can you touch on, I guess, to start, let's touch on what we could do at the local level and then go up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the local level, there are a few things that can be done. Making materials last as long as they possibly can last is a great way to be able to reduce scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, because the less you have to remake a product, the less energy that goes into making that product, right? And all of the logistics that go around getting it to where it needs to go, building it, all of those sorts of things. So, that's one thing that can be done at the local level. Another thing that can be done is simply reuse, right? If there's an opportunity to reuse materials, that's probably the highest and best way to be able to practice a circular economy, is being able to, reuse any material that you possibly can reuse, make it last as long as possible, and then at the end of its life, when it can't be reused further, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing what you can to make
It's
sure that
lived
that
its
product
life.
is designed to be able to come back and be an input for some other material.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
So even though that material, that product has lived its life, the goal is to use that in some other way to benefit another product.
It could be another product or the same product,
or
right?
the same.
But
Okay.
really, the goal is to be able to use that material at its highest and best use. And highest and best use could be it comes back and is used for something that reduces the next product's Scope 3 emissions. It could be better than the alternative of it being used as maybe like cover for a landfill or something.
Okay.
Right? You want to be able to make sure that you're making full use of that material, that it's being used at its highest value.
Highest value use. So an example at a local level, and I think it was mentioned earlier, but the recycled tires that are used in playgrounds, right? I think if we as the audience are trying to think back in our own lives how we've seen circular economy used, that is an example of such, or that is one such example, where it's old tires or used rubber, and that's instead of we're replacing wood chips.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. In that example, though, you're actually downcycling the material. This is another term that we'll use, where that material is being used for a purpose. It's being designed to be a tire for a car, right?
Right.
And I'm doing something that is not quite putting it into a landfill, but I'm not using that material necessarily at its highest and best use. I'm grinding it up and I'm using it in a playground, right? A good example could be gypsum, for instance, right?
Yes.
Gypsum for us is pretty much infinitely recyclable if it's handled appropriately, right?
Okay.
It can be brought back at the end of its life, ground up and made back into new gypsum materials. That is an example of using a material at its highest and best value.
I think most people may not be aware of.
Yeah, they probably aren't. And I think it has become the norm in society to do the easiest thing, which is to put it in a bin somewhere, and then it gets taken to a landfill at the end of its life.
Out of what is it? Out of space, out of mind.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah,
Thank you. My goodness. So, and that's that is the issue, right? Where we want to understand how we could further utilize the products to extend their life and use them in ways that do so. Another example, and I want to bring this up because you've mentioned insulation already, but I really want to get to this, and it's the New York skyscrapers.
Yes.
And taking the recycled glass and utilizing that in our products. Could you elaborate on that story? And that's not really study, but elaborate on that for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, one good example is we are working with a partner, the company called the Durst Organization. They're a large building owner, developer in New York City, to be able to remove building glass that's in skyscrapers in New York City, take that material out and get it back to our processors, our partner processors, and be able to move that material back to our insulation plants to be able to make insulation out of it. The great part about that story is, number one, you're preventing that material from going to landfill.
Yeah.
You're displacing what would otherwise be raw materials that would be, dug up out of the ground, those sorts of things.
Right.
And in that process, by avoiding it going to landfill and using it in a process where it reduces, again, the amount of energy it takes us to remelt that glass, we're cutting the CO2 of the alternative of it going to landfill by about 40%. Wow. So it's a great story. It is a great product because the product itself is meant to, of course, save energy. Right. So it's a product that's meant to save energy, and we can end up making it with less energy by using recycled materials.
Right. It's so impressive, and I think that's at the largest scale. That is a great use, and what paints a perfect picture on what the circular economy is, where you're taking, in this example, right, or this story, the recycled glass from skyscrapers, you're using it in a product that will ultimately help the building, the homeowner save energy or save on energy costs. Excuse me.
That's right.
So I mean, and it paints a great picture. Looking forward, I think and we've talked about other examples, and we'll get to that, but I want to touch on a few things about just. We've touched on a local level. I want to get more specific on how our customers, contractors, what roles do our customers play in essentially, fostering that circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think having an interest in circular economy is certainly a good place to start, right? If we've got customers that are engaged on this topic, they are very interested in reducing their, overall environmental footprint.
Sure.
A great way to be able to do that is through a circular economy. So having customers that are engaged in these topics or asking us for this, of course, gives us the license to be able to work on these topics more, and to be able to develop the ways that we bring materials back, the design of materials even further. So they are. The input from the customer is essential in that respect. The other thing that it allows us to do with input from the customer is to understand how they're interacting with the product, right? How are they using the product on a day-to-day basis? Why is it not lasting maybe 30 years in the environment that it was designed to last? Right? Why is it being pulled out of the building earlier?
Yeah.
So it brings us closer to our customer, understand their needs a little bit better. By understanding their needs a little bit better, it might be able to help us design a product that's more flexible for what they actually need it for. Right? And it may allow us to also be able to understand how do the systems that are installed in that building work, right? And how do we better design products in order to be able to meet the needs for that customer? So I think really, in the end, it's more than just trying to prevent things from going to a landfill.
Yeah.
It's how does the whole system work better together, and how do we design an economy that's based on that, not just on accepting that things end up in a landfill at the end of their life.
Absolutely. And I think that we talked about this again before, but that is one of the things we were going to ask you about buzzwords and what we don't like about them, and that's your answer is ultimately that. We don't want these to be buzzwords. We just want this to become.
That's right. This is the way our economy, our society should work, right? This is using materials, again, at their highest and best value, right? It's people getting the performance that they want to get out of materials, not having to compromise that by doing that at the same time. So, to me, it's what the future looks like, and all these words go away because it's just the way that we operate.
It's just the way that we operate. So, Dennis, I want to ask you, not really 5 things, 3 things, but what are some things that we need, that you need to create a successful circular economy?
One of the things that's necessary for anything that we're doing in sort of the environmental space, the sustainability space, one of the things that my team does is they do these things called life cycle assessments. Life cycle assessments looks at what are the impacts, the environmental impacts of everything from digging up raw materials out of the ground until whatever the end of life situation looks like. Without that data, it's hard to really intervene in like what's in our process that could be high impact, what raw materials are higher impact, how do we find different materials that we could do the same thing with, have the same performance. So starting with good data to understand what are the impacts of that material is number one. Number 2 is it's really about design. Circular economy, if you're starting from an end product and trying to find a home for that material at the end of its life, it's tough going because generally the ways to be able to get materials back, to be able to use as raw materials are underdeveloped in this country, specifically because we don't practice a circular economy here. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into understanding what's the performance of these materials when we bring them back. How clean can we bring them back? If they're contaminated, they may not function the same way. And cause a product to prematurely fail, which obviously we don't want to happen. So there's a lot of work that needs to be able to go in from a design perspective to really make sure that the product's going to perform in as good or a better way than the regular part of the product.
And that's the goal is to do that ahead of time.
Do it ahead of time.
Don't do it after the end of life. We're talking about planning for that before we even get to that.
Yes. And going back to what I mentioned before about only 77% of the global economy being circular, we're doing a lot of that going back and trying to figure it out after the fact, which is much harder than starting with something that is a circular product that was designed to come back to us, that can tolerate maybe some contamination in the raw materials that are going into it, those sorts of things. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. The last thing that I'll probably say is the business models that go along with this. The reverse supply chain of getting materials back, they're missing pieces of that. I go back again to that, our economy has been optimized to put stuff in a hole in the ground at the end of its life. Our team does a lot of work to understand what's the virgin raw material supply chain look like, what's the recycled raw material supply chain look like, and how do we intervene in various ways in order to be able to bring those things on parity, right? One way that we do that is we have our venture group, our Nova venture group. They go out and look for innovative ways that we can understand new materials, understand new business models, these sorts of things. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into trying to design a circular economy that functions in as good or a better way than the traditional linear economy does.
Right. No, it's such a great it's a great opportunity for us to we want to be the leaders in light sustainable construction, obviously, but it allows us to put our best foot forward in that space. You've talked about your team a lot. I want to give you the opportunity to explain to us what else you and your team oversee, because you've mentioned a few things there, and your team is doing such great work, not only to help circular economy, but you've talked about life cycle assessments and the data that is involved there. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk more about your team.
Yeah, I mean, so our team covers a couple key areas across North America as it relates to our goal to be the worldwide leader in light and sustainable construction. We have this team of people that do life cycle assessments. Right. I talked a little bit about those studies, but those studies really give us a roadmap for product and process development over time. What is it that we can work with the plants with? What is it that we can work with R&D with? Supply chain, purchasing, all of these.
Every step along the way. Yeah.
Finance, yes. Everybody plays an integral role in impacting sustainability in this company. So our team kind of serves as that bridge to give that roadmap. We work with our plants, obviously, for things like waste, water, CO2 reduction, renewable energy, helping to make sure that we're making our plants as efficient as they possibly can, and then trying to do whatever we can to work with our purchasing team to procure clean energy as much as possible. We have a policy and advocacy arm to what we do that works to try and find beneficial policy that's happening across the country or in other parts of the world. We're a European company. There are a lot of things that Europe, quite frankly, does better than us as it relates to a circular economy and sustainability. So it's how do we discover what those good policies are, and how do we work with our trade groups, with our industry groups, in order to be able to make sure that there's good policy put in place in the places what we're trying to do to enable a circular economy, enable a more sustainable world in general. Yeah. So, and then we do things for product stewardship and compliance. So making sure that when we put a material out there, we know exactly what's in it. We know what the requirements are, or regulatory requirements might be out there, and that we're doing what we can to put a product out there that our customers really, really want. So a lot of teamwork, cross-functional work across North America.
I love it.
People come to this company, work on this topic at this point. I mean, I certainly came to this company to be able to work on this topic.
Like you said at the top, right? This was a kind of a goal of yours, was to get directly involved in this.
That's right. So it has become, over the 18 years that I've been here, it's really kind of grown. And with sustainability really being the strategy of Saint-Gobain, it's a really great place to work.
Yeah. You mentioned the 7% number a few times now. What are some examples of other economies who are adapting to the circular economy, or other parts of the world who are adapting to the circular economy? Can you just provide some light on what those look like?
Some of the examples that I gave, if you look to Europe, right? Generally, what is driving circular economy in a lot of situations are maybe some societal challenges, right? It could be we don't have landfill space and we've got to pay a lot for landfills. So moving a material to a landfill space could cost the customer a lot of money. So those customers are obviously looking for a solution so they don't have to pay that cost.
Sure.
Not having enough raw materials, right? So if your raw materials are running out,
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that scarcity situation can cause the cost of raw materials to go up. So you're doing what you can in order to be able to bring back raw materials in order to reduce that strain on the natural raw materials that might be out there, right? So in the European Union, they're already doing gypsum recycling at scale. They're already doing glass recycling at scale. So these things are happening in other parts of the world that we are really trying to learn for those things, bring them here and build them into our way of doing business in North America.
So there's opportunity to take that number, the 7% number,
there absolutely
and boost that up.
Yeah. I mean, I am quite confident that this will not only be the way the economy will work in the future, but it will be the way the economy has to work in the future.
Has to, yeah.
Just because of scarcity issues and, scarcity of even things like landfill space.
Absolutely. I mean, which again, another thing I had not crossed my mind, and you touched on it just then, but what does the future of what does the future of this look like moving forward? If you have a crystal ball, we're looking 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. what is the goal for circular economy? Is it 100%? Is that feasible? It's probably a pipe dream, but possible.
I think it is possible. I mean, I think starting with design and looking at how we run our economy, where things end up at the end of their life, understanding really where the externalities on society really are, right? So it's an externality that your product ends up in a landfill at the end of its life, right? If you can do something to prevent that, you're not only preventing long-term scarcity of your raw material, but you're also potentially reducing the potential issues that you could have of that material being in that place, that's not breaking down over time. So, I just see it as the way society needs to end up at some point. So the faster we can get there, I think the better off we all are.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Sure. Dennis, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute joy, an absolute pleasure being able to talk about this and learn so much personally about circular economy and how we can all do a little better.
Great. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you for watching Building Science Digest. Make sure to like, subscribe, and watch anywhere you can get your podcasts.